The horror of the Chaos cult leadership. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and faces of the Warhammer 40k setting, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we shall be taking a deep dive into that place that few people wish to actually go. For we always hear about the despotism of the Imperium, its injustice, its tyranny. Yet when the adherents of chaos throw around these words, make these quite justified accusations, they seem to be firing missiles from a papier-mâché edifice. It is all true, of course. For the very first book, Rogue Trader had that most famous of all quotes that has been dragged out throughout the entire history of the setting. Forget the power of technology, science, and common humanity. Forget the promise of progress and understanding. For there is no peace amongst the stars, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter, and the laughter of thirsting gods. The Imperium of mankind is the most brutal and repressive regime imaginable. It is a horror beyond comprehension, but few take the time to truly reflect on why this is the case. For the human spirit is an astonishing thing. It rebels against tyranny. It resists authoritarianism with its every breath. The human soul is a beautiful thing, and few presently remember that. It is only twisted by the horrors to which it is subjected. And many a pundit will shriek that the Imperium is the true villain in the piece, the untenable boot smashing down on the face of all humanity, as Orwell so rightly warned. Yet this is, in one word, daft. For none of these buffoons understand the one simple point that is fundamental to the entire setting. The Imperium has no choice. None at all. Now again, many will state that they do. Of course they do. But the leadership, the nobility of the Imperium is run by rabid wolves who think only of themselves and their own ego, power, position, and creature comforts. Again, this may well be true. But let us not hide from the fact that two things can be true at the same time. Yes, the Imperium is a horror. But yes, there is no choice whatsoever. The wide-eyed optimist may leap onto a barricade and raise a banner of freedom, ignorantly proclaiming that freedom and understanding are possible in all times and all places, that they are only suppressed by the perfidy of unrighteous souls. This may well be true of the real world, but we are not talking about the here and now. We are talking about a universe that has palpable evil as a very real and existential threat to everything and everyone who dwells there. The universe of the grim dark is a nightmare because it contains nightmares. It is largely run by them or those who attempt to resist them. The human populace of the Imperium has little if any free time. They are worked until they drop, starved of tuition, enlightenment, logic, civility, or even life-giving nutrients. It is an exaggerated world where evil undeniably exists, and manifests in so many ways, be they crude, brutal, or cunning. The free thinker, given time to sit on a placid and pleasant grassy knoll, who looks upon this universe would be terrified. Yet, in this universe, the humans given any time whatsoever will realize their lives are painful, purposeless, and pointless. And this will then lead them to resentment, dissatisfaction, and, of course, outright rebellion, as does indeed happen every day across the entirety of the Imperium. Yet this does not compromise the undeniable fact that the enemy of the Imperium is so much worse. And those who would claim that democracy, tolerance, and acceptance are the panacea to the entire race's woes are, for lack of a better word, criminally ignorant. For every single path of freedom has now been claimed by the enemy. Only by defeating and expunging the dark gods of chaos, root and stem, can even the slightest slackening on the leash be permitted. For the dreamer will become a plaything for either the Lord of Pleasures and Perfection, Slanesh, or become a pawn for the great deceiver, the Lord of Lies, Zinch. The democracy that stands will always inexorably fall to the power of the dark gods, as their kindnesses and tolerance will permit the growth of cliques and cults that will always lead to the worship of the dark gods. In this setting, the strong will move in the background and destroy the weak. The vaunted rights and liberties we take for granted in the here and now would lead to the utter destruction of any world, because it is within these nuanced existences that the temptation and terror of the dark gods makes most effort, gain, and largest foothold. If one can do what one wishes, then this will lead to any of the paths of corruption. Not could, not might, but will. And any organization is only as resilient to capture as the individuals who make it up. And in the grim dark future, it only takes one weak link, one person, to bring an entire world and all of its population to their knees. It is why the knowledge of chaos alone has previously meant the death sentence to all but those who have shown the will to endure the temptation. For that is always their way into the human heart. Temptation. And the dark gods can grant many a boon. Permit a man to save his family from the plague. Give him advantage over his enemies so that he can dominate any boardroom. Suffuse his sinews with unnatural strength to defeat any foe in a clash of arms. Or the most pervasive to many, the ability to experience life and lust and pleasure to a degree that makes normal living forever tepid and tiring thereafter. The naive proposition that the dark gods are more clement than the ecclesiarchy, the preposterous proposal that they are somehow the better of the two unenviable choices, is quite pathetic. For when one falls to the worship of the chaos gods, there is nothing but a degeneration downwards towards bestiality, monstrosity, or a pitiable life, where nothing matters but the love of the Dark Ones, not family, friends, culture, or race. All is consumed in the adoration of beings that are near oblivious to the sacrifices their supplicants perform. Only acts of true grandiose scale or depths of depravity will even register to the Dark Ones. The Imperium may well force a man to watch his spouse perish, his little ones starve, and his very body and soul be sacrificed to the perpetual war machine of its armies. But the Dark Gods will force that man to do these things himself, to slaughter his own kith and kin, to perform unspeakable acts to his nearest and dearest. And all the while he will have to maintain a fixed rictus grin on his face as he believes that he is doing the right thing, praising the powers as they wish. There is little honor, restraint, or compassion in the Imperium of man, but to be a human in a chaos cult is to be a monster, a beast, an animal that whimpers at the caress or cuff of its dark master's hand, a screeching psychopath or base degenerate with no composure, control, or clarity. It is to sacrifice one's own humanity on the pyre of perdition itself. They are not the same. Not nearly. So, now that we have cleared that up a bit, let us get to the meat of the matter. The most high of the chaos cults, the paragons of pain, the leadership of the chaos sects. Now, as usual, I shall attempt to not just bombard you with facts and figures, but to permit you to truly see the universe as I see it, via the medium of a story. For we shall be discussing a few different ranks, positions, and units that are most extant in the forces of chaos. And so, Let us delve into what I self-deridingly call the Bald Library to see what we can see. The Dark Commune. Lord Kaiseran looked out upon the fruits of his labour. His arms wide in exultation, he ululated to a multi-hued sky. Where clouds should have been, there were reflective lakes, clearly exhibiting to all what was happening on the planet's surface. The background was not blue. There were now rippling waves of every colour, known or imaginary. The sun beamed down through it all, but its white rays now blasted down almost at random, like a child holding up a magnifying glass. They burned and blasted anything the beam struck. Stone walls burst into flame, people were incinerated in seconds, and the demagogue looked down and laughed. The streets, carpeted by the screaming, writhing, running and fighting masses, the gutters ran with blood. It was pandemonium. All repressed urges were released, all scores being settled, and all augmented by the blessings of the dark gods, their emanations striking the population like a direct assault on their very core, their belief, their inhibitions, their control, all washed away. The city had fallen from within, as planned. Lord Kaiseran was the fifth of his name. This had been a plot long in the laying, longer in the hatching. For hundreds of years, his family had been spreading their slow tendrils across society, had spread what the ecclesiarchy would call a taint. Heresy. It all began when his great-great-grandfather had been in the Guard, the Astra Militarum. He had been a leader of a regiment on the front. He did not speak of what he saw out there, but he did bring back spoils of war. Much was sold off, elevating the Kaiseran line mightily, yet not all. He passed down what he had learned from the scrolls, the most precious of things that became the heirloom of his family. For they spoke of secret forces in the universe, beings that were both kind and benevolent to those who offered to reciprocate their love. Each generation built upon the knowledge and experience of the last, and the clan expanded and was blessed with abundance and plenty and fecundity. In 4 short generations, they had gone into marriage alliances with most of the minor, then on to many of the major houses of the nobility. Their rise was meteoric, and all of this was due to their secret benefactors. For now there were hundreds of them performing the rituals, a not-so-secret society of consanguinity. The latest head of House Kaiseran had taken command of the family when his father's blood was being guzzled by a summoned Burning One, cunningly slipped past his predecessor's defenses, as was the new tradition of succession. It had seemed so long ago, but this was a scant 2 decades only, and the change in leadership brought a far more brutal regime, one that would bring the cult to its ultimate goal: control of everything and everyone on this planet. Finally, the word had been given. The sacrifices gathered and prepared. The rites and circles checked again and again. All across the planet, the rituals were being performed in unison. 999 thralls were used in each of 9 sites, 1 on each continent. Most expected the change to be immediate, but they were not the initiated. Kaiseran used the time to coordinate his forces, place them in key positions, and they waited. 9 days, 9 hours, and 9 minutes they waited. Dusk was its beginning. and the madness was begun, by a distant scream in every mind on the planet. Some welcomed it, those of the blood and their cultist networks. Others were driven instantly mad, the floodgates of unfettered emotions and impulses unleashed. The whole populace fell upon each other. In the confusion that followed, the cult assaulted the two places that could pose any real threat to them: the command HQ and staff of the regiments, and the temples of the Imperial cult. Well-armed, coordinated, and led, the insurgents swept through them with ease, but still, the bloodshed was ghastly. Some of the ecclesiarchy remained immune to the mind-warping effects of the curse, but they were overwhelmed. The cult now controlled all organized forces, the only ones who could operate while the madness unraveled the minds of near all others. Of the thousands who had lived and preached, a bare few hundred clerics were taken, often because of the zeal of their captors, but not exclusively. For some of the faithful had been terrible in their capabilities. Some had circles of death around them, but no man can stand against a tide of foes forever. Atop the highest balcony, Kaiseran stood, basking in his total victory. He smirked as he now grew bored of simply watching the carnage unfold. He turned, his guards now preceding and following him, one in front, one behind. Tall, clothed in black robes, armored and with wicked weapons on their backs and hanging from their belts. They were his enforcers, his hands, his fists, his blades, his shield and anchor. They never left his side unless he expressly ordered it. But this, of course, was very rare. Kaiseran barely acknowledged they were there. Even inside his own mind, they were never even a second thought to him. Like the sight of your nose whenever you open your eyes, they were a part of him, his existence. Kaiseran stepped into a great hall, one of the upper regions of the Cathedral of the God Emperor, in this, the capital. Before him were 100 of them in neat lines, heads down, bruised, bleeding, but alive. Each on their knees, of course. The clergy. Those who had been taken alive, those who had stated that they had seen the light. Surrounding them at the walls and behind them in force were the mob. Cultists armed with stubbers and chain blades, if they were of reasonable rank. Others had standard-issue lasguns taken from the Imperial Guard armories. Many stood in their uniforms, but with their tattoos and other sigils of faith on display now. Kaiseran took the simple steps up to a pulpit and addressed the captured priests. He sneered down on them. Disheveled and beaten, their finery could still be seen. Soft clothes and full bellies, but hearts as empty as their heads, mused Kaiseran. He despised their weakness. And so he began. The great ones are ready to accept you into their hearts. But there are unworthy traitors amongst you. Only when you have been purified may you pass the test. The hall beyond you is where wonders can be gained. Kaiseran pointed to the central room behind some ceremonial curtains, the place where only high clergy could go prior to this day. There you will find true purpose. You will find a truth beyond anything you have ever experienced. You will find complete fulfillment. But you have impure amongst you. Only when the righteous remain will you venture forward to your destiny. Kaiseran then took out 2 swords and hurled them to clang before the kneeling priests. You all know what must happen. You do. So do it. Striding down the stairs, and then flanked again by his blessed blades, Kaiseran walked towards the curtains. A priest shrieked and scooped up one of the blades and ran towards the demagogue's turned back. He did not get within 5 paces of Kaiseran, as his bladesmen turned on their heels and easily blocked his clumsy blow, and beheaded the priest with ease. The severed head bounced, then rolled to land before the kneeling 99 that remained. Then 2 leapt up and clutched at the swords, but turned them on those around them, not towards Kaiseran. And within moments, the slaughter began. At the curtain stood a man holding the icon of the Great Ones, a diabolic sight of twisted bones and silently screeching faces, all atop a banner of purest gold. And at its bottom, a man holding the great icon. Although man was a loose description, he had not had a face for many years. His arms were more tentacular than hominid. It rasped from a hole in its neck as it bowed to Kaiseran, the demagogue, as he passed. It straightened and followed him beyond.
Are there traitors amongst them? Did you see this in the fires?
Kaiseran snorted and chortled, then retorted as they both walked on. They are all traitors, my lord. Of course, they once prayed to the corpse god.
They have seen the light.
But who's to say they may see another light when our backs are turned? They are fickle. No, they must be leavened, purified by pain. The Iconarch nodded. They then proceeded to another similar area. This time, the high clergy. The bishops and cardinals knelt. They had been captured, but they had not been forced to repent. They merely awaited judgment. Kaiseran now clicked his fingers, and a being without a mind shambled forward. The will of Kaiseran, the only thing that gave it impetus, animation at all. The will of Kaiseran. For in its grasp, it had a long, wide rod with a bulbous top covered in a black veil. Wires stretched from its veins into the rod. Kaiseran reached the head of the hall and turned again. His Iconarch and blessed blades beside him, the animated black-clad thing before him, between the demagogue and the high priesthood. He smiled at their wide eyes, their sweat-drenched faces all looking to him in anguish, yet none moved to challenge him. None. Kaiseran raised both his arms in the air, fists clenched, voice booming. Now, you who have crawled on your bellies to a weak and feeble being, you shall pay the price of your infamy. Witness the power of the true gods. On the last word, he brought both fists down in a fluid, furious movement, and the shambling thing before him then wobbled, and the cloth came off the top of the rod. There was a head, misshapen and bloated, but eyes had moved of their own volition, sentient and menacing. Then those eyes began to glow, and from them tore a wave of power that swept forward. It struck each of the clergy and twisted them as its light passed. Each now writhed and screamed, if they had a mouth anymore. Sickening sounds of cracking rebounded around the room as their frames twisted and shattered, eyes popping and teeth growing to hideous sizes, flesh boiling and peeling back from the sinew. The score of clergy died under the ever-shifting mutations that tore through their bodies. Those who lasted longest left the most pitiful moans as their last testament. Kaiseran watched this all with a twinkle in his eye. It seemed to take a very long time. He enjoyed the moment, as he heard the clangor of battle from the other room subside, and one man dragged himself under the curtains, bleeding from every limb, leaving a red wake of blood as he did so, barely holding in his intestines and from a severed and ruptured stomach. Kaiseran walked to him and loomed above. He then knelt down and took the sole survivor's face in his hands. I always knew it would be you. Now, you shall witness splendor like you have never known. And Kaiseran then blessed the man. The dark gods brought their bounty, and his wounds knitted. His blood seeped back into his form, which now contorted and shifted into its new visage. Stronger, taller, more potent than ever before. This last man of 100, whose lips were now sealed shut, his eyes closed and his ears increased in size and sensitivity. Kaiseran let go of his head and took his arms and drew him up. This would be a fine warrior. Another addition for his blessed blades, should he prove able. At least, he had now proven he was loyal. For he did not just leave his blood back in that outer room. He left his soul there. Now and forevermore. Mind, body, and soul. He belonged to the Dark Gods and their envoy, Lord Kaiseran. And Kaiseran would need him, for now that the enemy had been bested, now that the world was theirs, Kaiseran knew. He would have to eliminate every last one of his line, and of course, any others who tried to step into their shoes to try to challenge him. Kaiseran was the demagogue, and he would not relinquish this crown easily. And so we now know of the Dark Commune, a cult demagogue, his two blessed blades or more, the Iconarch and the Mind Witch. They are the beating heart at the pinnacle of many a coven or cult. They are the ultimate expression of the mortal worshippers of the Dark Gods, the cream of the crop. Yet we shall also be discussing the cultist Firebrand, the rogue Psyker, and the Accursed cultists, mutants and torments also. For more than any, they are the core of the cults of the Dark Gods. So let us begin with the Blessed Blades. Fighters of exceptional worth, with formidable training and iron will, they are the ultimate mortal bodyguards, for each of them has fought through thousands, if not tens of thousands, to be where they are in the pecking order. Lethality and fanaticism rarely found in an unenhanced being. They are executioners, assassins, and close protection. Sworn to the demagogue, their only role is to act as his right hand. Each has their tongue or voice box removed, if not both, so that they can never challenge an order, refute an allegation, or pass on what they have heard while in the service of their lord. Their only function is to kill anyone who the demagogue has decided has outlived their usefulness, or anyone else who is so stupid as to attempt to assassinate him. The Iconarch is a standard bearer not for the demagogue alone, but for the entire cult. This being will carry the most unholy icon that is the center of the battle line. Like any other standard bearer in any other army, they are some of the most stoic of all. No enemy will cow them, no battle intimidate them. The icon itself can be a banner, brazier, or any other form of symbol that the cult holds as its fetish. Most are gruesome and ghoulish beyond compare, yet when raised on high, the cult's fervor will remain ablaze. And, as is usual with the Dark Gods, should these beings be impressed by the activities of their followers, blessings of the Dark Gods will erupt amongst the cult. Extra limbs, laser eyes, bulletproof skin, distended claws. All things are possible under the gaze of the Chaos Gods. They warp and mutate any and all that they wish, in whatever way they wish. Sometimes this will lead to utter victory. Other times it can lead to crushing defeat. If the Lord of Change decides that his army does not need their legs, transforming their bottom halves into a slug or even a tree, who is to deny the inscrutable will of the gods? Standing near the demagogue in most situations, they are a living proclamation of his divine right to lead, a right that can always be challenged, of course. The Mind Witch is possibly the most grisly of the cadre, for this is the severed head of a psyker or sorcerer that has been attached to a standard that sustains its life, but definitely not its sanity. The head is then hefted around the place by a mindless entity. Once human, its mind has been wiped, or its brain even scooped out and consumed or discarded. It matters not. The thing is like a chaos servitor. No thought, no need, no urges. It moves the mind witch around and faces it in the direction the demagogue commands. But these mind witches have immense power. Not only are they the gifted, able to touch the warp, but they are commonly a conduit for the powers of the dark gods, even more so than the icon brought to battle. The mind witch most often releases a wave of mutagenic power that warps and twists all it touches. They can express more simple or direct use of their abilities also. More than one elite unit has been annihilated by its gaze. More than one bastion wall has fallen by its open mouth blasting out resonances that pull apart and unmake the very fabric of reality. The walls will come down, and the cult then attacks through these breaches. And there, at the center of the Dark Commune, at the very pinnacle of the Chaos Pyramid of Power, stands the Demagogue. As a Dark Apostle is to the Chaos Space Marines, so is the Demagogue to the cult. They are charismatic leaders able to twist the souls of those they address purely by the power of their oratory. They can lash another with their tongues so that they would wish that they had never been born. They lead the cult and preach to them, reinforcing their faith in the dark powers. For every cardinal in the ecclesiarchy, for every priest that extols that the emperor protects, giving courage to his flock, there stands the demagogue, the equal and opposite of these clergy. They are cunning cult leaders, for they are also gifted with a facility to read the portent sent by their gods. The demagogue in this way is very truly the ambassador of the chaos powers in real space. They can watch the skies or look into fires, observe the way a man twitches when executed, divining the will of their patron through the entrails of an enemy or sacrifice. Like the icon and the mind witch, they can call down the blessings or curses of the dark powers, making them the heart and soul of the cult. A new demagogue might slaughter his way to the top and then connive to replace the present leader. Thus, every demagogue must be as wary of his underlings and servants, every bit as much, if not more so, than his enemies. For in the service of chaos, there is no loyalty but to the gods. There is no honor or oath except to the gods. And each of their servants must not only prove their devotion, but their power and ability. Not once, not regularly, but frequently and forever. For the dark gods are fickle and can get bored easily. Thus the demagogue must excel not only in oratory, politics and combat, but must constantly prove himself to his god and his followers both. The demagogue must be awe-inspiring to a degree that most, if not all, claimants to their position will turn away before they even set out to plot and plan the leader's destruction. And this is their greatest weakness. All of this, makes the chaos forces believe that they are the most driven, the most potent, and the most hungry for victory. And this can be their downfall. For when one believes that victory is destined, cannot possibly not occur due to the beneficence of their deity, it can often lead them to underestimate their opposition. The claim of the Chaos Cult, the very battle cry of the traitor legions, death to the false god, it is their greatest weakness. For if the enemy's god is false and yours is true, then surely victory is guaranteed. And then mistakes are made. This, more than anything, the blind certainty of the chaos fanatic, is a reason for their defeats, overconfidence through zeal. Now that we have covered the inner circle of the cult, let us discuss more elements commonly found amongst the ranks. For cults are not like armies, they are rabbles, crowds whipped into a frenzy and then unleashed upon their foes, and this is terrifying in its initial impact. They act like a swarm of tyranids, using sheer strength of bodies, weight of numbers to get anything done. Yet when the initial shock of their advent is absorbed, the battle proper begins. It is so often the case that if a Chaos Cultist uprising is not successful in its first swipe at power, then they are exterminated. for massed ranks of rabble have never truly beaten organized and disciplined forces. The Imperial Guard, even the planetary defense, are usually more than enough to utterly exterminate these undisciplined masses. For the cult mob, no matter its size, is a thing of id alone. They will scream and bellow, charge into combat, and be elated and empowered when they stomp on others. But when they face staunch lines, men who will look them in the eyes and stand their ground, the casualties dished out to a cult will be ignored, may even enthuse them to assault even harder, until it does not. When the tide turns, the cult loses its momentum, they will turn tail and run. And then the soldiers will follow up and cover the battlefields and beyond, with howling, running, animalistic cultists dead. Most often, it is an exercise in will. Who will break first? The screeching mob or the defenders? And whomever breaks first breaks entirely and forfeits possession of the world or city in question. But as with most things in the grim darkness of the far future, there are exceptions, for even the cults will have their top-tier elite forces, the Accursed cultists being one. These are bands of warriors who have been blessed by the dark powers. They are mutated in various ways, often the result of the activities of the Mind Witch or Demagogue. They are terrifying to behold. Some act like possessed marines, the Demagogue or a sorcerer of the cult having drawn glyphs upon their very skins. Neverborn demons are then summoned to possess their forms. As they are far from as skilled as their near-immortal traitor Astartes' allies, the process is not always completed successfully, meaning that they are suffused by the power of chaos, but the sentience of the demons are not fully in command of the accursed cultist. Yet each of the mutations that they are blessed with are meant to improve their skills, staying power, resilience, or destructive potential. Accursed cultist mobs are an X-factor that may well be burned along with the entire advancing line of rabble, or they may be blessed and augmented so much that they run through oncoming fire and exterminate anything they touch. These things are called the Accursed cultist torments. Of course, there are also cultist mutants, but these are not the same. They are humans who were mutated by biology a long time ago. But mutants are hated and feared inside the Imperium. Hunted to extinction, they have little choice but to join the forces of chaos. These units are stable, not usually as terrible as their torment brethren, but they will have a predictable effect as their abilities do not rely on the fickle powers of the warp. The most often encountered of these groups is the Felgor Beastmen. These are the humans who now look more like goats or other beasts, static mutations that makes them more abhumans, but they are so unpleasant to view as a normal baseline human that they are considered to be tainted by evil, even when none is present. Yet, despite having once fought in the armies of the Imperium, the Beastmen are now forced to hide from humanity, or turn to its enemies for succor. The rogue Psyker is the next to be mentioned, for we all know the fate of Psykers within the Imperium. The ones that are not burnt as witches on feral or other backwards worlds are captured and dragged off by the black ships to either be fed to the Emperor on his golden throne, or trained to be in his Adeptus Astra Telepathica. Those who can hide their powers, or use them to dominate others so that they are never discerned. They can secretly grow in power and purpose until their dabbling in the warp brings them into the service of any of the dark gods. It is almost inevitable, for this is not a pleasant universe. It is a scarred and broken one, forever tainted by the evil that men do. Hence, without the structure and defense of the Imperium's training, no matter how brutal it may be, the lone Psyker is almost guaranteed to fall to chaos. Just as they did during Old Night, just as they did when entire worlds burned during the period before the coming of the Emperor. And as Psykers, they can exhibit all forms of horror on the battlefield. If you can imagine it, then it is possible, and thus It has occurred in the grim darkness of the far future. These are powerful beings that a demagogue will either use and abuse or discard as he needs. Yet, their effect on the lines of the Imperium cannot be underestimated, and are tragically difficult to counter without the assistance of Imperial Psykers. The last on this litany of hate is the cultist Firebrand. A divine figure, if I must say so myself, but it is a simple premise as well. They are humans who have been blessed in a very specific way. The Firebrand will have ritual torches sunk into their body, transforming them into living conduits of the dark powers, which in this case always expresses itself in the form of gouts of unholy flame. Like living, walking volcanoes, they can direct this fire to annihilate all before them. For this is no normal fire, so no standard armor will make anyone proof from its consuming touch. And the presence of the Firebrand is a walking proof of the power of the Dark Ones, so they are secondary focal points about which a cult will mass. When the Firebrand strides into combat, he will be flanked by sways of the cult, all witnessing the wrath of their god firsthand, and this leads them to further morale, conviction, and determination. The appearance of a Firebrand at a weak point in the Chaos Cult lines can shore them up and then make them go on the attack. Yet, as with all things involving chaos, there is a cost. Should the Firebrand be slain, then they can explode with catastrophic results for whomever is around them. And so we conclude. Now many will sneer at the cults and dismiss them, as they are not Astartes or worthy in battle. But this is another form of overconfidence that is usually the purview of the foul. If the Space Marines win the battles of the Imperium, it is the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, who actually win the wars. But the same is true for the Dark Ones. It may be the traitor Astartes who can break open hardpoints, capture ships, and stand toe-to-toe with the elites of the Imperium. But it is the cults that make up the millions, billions, and trillions that are the true sinews of the Chaos armies. The limelight is always shone on the Primarchs, the Chapter Masters, and their elites. But the true nature of the war across the galaxy is not about who has the most potent pawns, the most powerful servants. Not really. The war being fought is between chaos and order. Both are savage and terrible. Both will never relent or shift from their position. They cannot. But it is also far more about the future of the human soul and reality itself. And in that milieu, there is far more import to be placed on sheer numbers. The Astartes can win the battles on either side, but the true war is one of faith. Whose viewpoint of the universe will prevail? And in this confrontation, it is not the heavy hitters that decide the ultimate victory. It is, as always, the masses. How many believe what? How strongly? The cults are far more dangerous to the very fabric of reality than the glorified names of note. And in this battle, with the psychic awakening and the great tear across reality, it is purely down to one thing. Who has the numbers? And who has the strongest faith? I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. I truly hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for your precious time. If you wish to see more, then please do like and subscribe, and of course hit the notifications button so you do not miss out. And now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.